right. So, hello everyone. Welcome to podcast number 7. That's my favorite number. So today we're going to talk a little bit about AI. But before that, let me ask you, Jan, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I am extremely excited, Hannah, because after nearly 2.5 years, I'll be going back to the UK to see my mum and dad, give them a big hug, and hopefully move on from this pandemic reality. So really, really excited for that, I have to say.
Well, exciting times ahead. That's nice. Oh, you just zoomed in. You can see yourself zooming in and out, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I also have a new camera that I've been playing with, but I haven't turned the cameraman on. Do you want me to turn on the camera for the extra dramatic settings?
But that zooming in and out was already dramatic. You want our viewers to have more oil. Okay, there, it's gone.
Okay, let's see what I do now.
All right. So please brace yourself for some dramatic Jan coming from a Bollywood movie. All right. So recently, Yana, when I was doing the news, I read that there's this company from Singapore called Monsieur, and they made an AI that can predict the song you want to listen to. So basically, they can predict the next hit, the next song hits. So that's one AI, right? And the other AI that researchers built was one AI using reinforcement learning, where they can simulate economies, and then they can put a startup in that economy, and then they can predict whether this startup will do well or how. And then from this, we can see that we can use AI to invest in any startup, right? Depending on how they're going to do. So with AI doing so much of progress, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think AI can predict almost anything?
I mean, that's a great question, right? And I think prediction, it comes a lot down to computation, right? So what's your computational capability that's available to you? Basically, can you crunch the numbers? So at first glance, it would seem like if you have more computation, then yes, you'll be able to predict anything you want. But unfortunately, one of the most important sciences that's come out of the 20th century, the mid half of the 20th century, is chaos theory. And chaos theory is not the idea that something is random. Chaos is the idea that something is aperiodic. So that means it still has a regularity, but it's difficult to predict. So for example, the weather, right? Let's say we live here in Malaysia, there's a monsoon, right? There's 2 monsoon seasons. And so we know at certain times of the year, it's very probable that it's going to be rainy, for example, December time, but we don't know exactly what day it's going to rain and how much it's going to rain. And there may be some variance there. So chaotic systems are complex systems that have a regularity to them. They're not completely, it doesn't snow, for example, in Malaysia, right? Or it's unlikely to hail or something like that. So you don't have completely random weather, but it's also difficult to predict exactly what's happening. And so what we're seeing is that this new science is teaching us that from a first principles basis, you cannot predict. You need a computer larger than the universe to just even make basic predictions, because the variables explode exponentially. So in that sense, I think it's worth noting that you cannot predict the future. And I think one of the most important shifts in Industry 4.0 is the shift in the way strategy is conceptualized, because this seductive illusion that you can predict the future is very dangerous, because what it does is it blinds you to your biases and how much things are changing. I mean, right now, for example, we're watching another crypto apocalypse, right? Everything is crashing. We're watching a war in the Ukraine. We're watching COVID breaking out again in China. All these things that would probably not have been predicted in many people's models, right? And so I think what that invites is an invitation to humility, to say you can't predict the future. And it's therefore much more important to invest in agility. So you're deliberately saying we don't know. Of course, you have planning, right? You have scenario planning, you have awareness of what might happen, but it's more about being able to respond quickly. So I think AI can be very useful for mapping out scenarios, mapping out possibilities, crunching the data. But I think we should be careful and think in not believing that it can be this sort of magical solution that can solve a chaotic system, because there is no solution to a chaotic system. The only way to figure out what's going to happen is to run it. And that's a very important insight, I think, from chaos theory is, and we see this in innovation, right? You can't predict an innovation. In the end, you just have to give it a go. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use AI to do some sensible market analysis and various other things, right? But I do think it precludes the possibility of this idea that you can fundamentally predict it if your AI was just smart enough. Now, going on to that idea around the example of predicting what music you like, I actually think that Spotify, I'm always amazed at how good the Spotify weekly AI synthesis is. Every week, Spotify will create 30 songs for an individual based on their playing habits. And I think it's often really, really good. And it's helped me discover a lot of really cool music that I really enjoy. And I've always been impressed by that. So I think there's something in music and musicality and what we like there. For example, if you wanted to look at my life and you saw playlists, and some might be sad, so I might be going through a sad time, or I was partying, so then there's party music, right? You could probably see what sort of the variance is in my life in an interesting way, right? So I think that these different forms of data sources and bringing AI to them can be really insightful into what they will share with us. But does that mean that you can absolutely predict what song I will like to 100% degree? No. But maybe, you have a high degree of confidence, and I think that's good enough really in that.
Okay. Just now you mentioned about Spotify knowing, doing your Spotify weekly and whatnot, right? But for me, what I found in YouTube, when I log into my YouTube and there's always like some songs appearing and I click on them, I'm like, this is exactly what I wanted to hear. I don't know, for me, it looks like this is exactly what I wanted. So, and it always happened like 100 and 100. So can they predict exactly? So I don't know. I mean, maybe for me, but for the other people, maybe more intelligent people, species, that doesn't work.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting point. And, I think we were just saying that this podcast is about sharing sort of a worldview, right? A leaderpreneur worldview that has very wide ranging. And I think when we think about reality and what we think reality is, we think we have an understanding of reality, but, we don't really. We have a best effort, a best attempt at making sense of things. In 1,000 years' time, people will look back on us and will say, wow, they knew a little bit, but they didn't know that much, in the same way that we look back at people 1,000 years ago, right? So what I think one of the really interesting ideas is that the universe is on our side and is actually trying to help us and will serve us the right thing that we need at the right time if we're open to it. And so I think what we often grow up with at the moment in our current early 21st century reality is this anxiety-driven reality. We often, through our notification systems, we're triggered to do something because otherwise we have an anxiety of missing something out, or FOMO drives us, things like that. And what we have somehow lost is this idea that actually things can be happening for a reason to help us. And I'm not saying that means that we somehow just kick back and relax and suddenly the angels and God and all these other things will suddenly appear and help us out. I'm not saying it's as simple as that. I'm just commenting on the idea it's a very basic belief. Do you believe that to be successful, you have to fight the universe, that you have to overcome obstacles? Or do you believe that the universe is actually neutral? It just doesn't care about you? Or do you believe that the universe is on your side and is actually a positive force, and that typically the main challenges in my life is usually my own silliness that stop me from enjoying the things that I'm really trying to enjoy? And this is a very interesting exploration of our belief systems, these three possibilities. Is it against us? Doesn't care about us? Or is it actually trying to enable us? And whatever we choose around that will then very fundamentally shift the way in which we experience our reality. And so I certainly work to live my life that everything is happening for a reason. And I find that, yes, the right song pops up, but why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't the right thing turn up? Why wouldn't the right moment come when it comes? When you live in that kind of approach, the universe changes in a way of being much more enabling rather than something that you have to be afraid of and in fear of being destroyed by.
Why do I always do this? So yeah, I was saying that's well said. And one thing for sure, what I've learned from Jan over the years is to let the universe sort of direct you towards something, and ask the universe and you will get it. So this is something that I've really learned from you, and I try to embed it as much as possible. So in that direction, Jan, what do you have to say about truth? Because I know you wanted to talk about truth, but could you share a little bit more on that? The truth and universe.
Yes. I mean, truth is such a big word, right? So I think one of the things that's come to really stand out in my mind in this industry 4.0 reality is the explosion of truths, right? As Trump famously said, right? These are true facts, right? What does that mean, right? And people will often say something's either true or not true, and we get into these sort of intense combative states where one person's right and one person's wrong, right? And it's this sort of like fight to the death, basically, about who owns the truth. And I think we've also unconsciously associated the idea of being true with being good, right? If I'm right, then I'm also somehow a good person. And if you're wrong, you're somehow a bad person. And there's this sort of moralistic tone that's come into this. It's difficult to at an unconscious level consider that someone might be wrong and a good person. I find that when I examine myself, there's this unconscious bias system there. And the reason why truth is important, regardless of what we want it to say, is truth is the foundation of reality. If there is no truth, there is no reality, right? We have to say, I am here, you are there, we are friends and colleagues, we are doing this podcast, right? The sun is shining, this is that, right? We have to agree around things, really. And that's really what truth can be understood as agreement. And so that's where I think going into this age, what we need to develop is a more mature understanding of what truth, how to understand truth, and also be more careful about how we work with it. Because if we get it wrong, then we will create great delusion, which ultimately leads to great destruction, right? I mean, I think there is no better case study at the moment in my mind than what's going on with Russia and the Ukraine right now. I think Russia and the leadership there and its people, for various reasons, I think are as delusional as Nazi Germany were. You know, I think I can say that because, you know, my parents do and my family do come from Germany. And we've had a lot of discussion and dialogue around this, and we've reflected a lot on this as a German people as a whole. And you don't think it's possible, but you can become completely deluded. And so what is particularly different about this age today is truth is just flooding in from everywhere, whatever information source, your social media, for example, but not just there, but anywhere and anything. And so we have this first idea that truth is about the building block of reality. So the second question is, who controls truth? Because those who control the truth control reality, right? And so there's an interesting way to think about truth in the evolution of human society, which could be simplified into 3 steps. And so the first one is that there just is truth. This could be considered as, you know, tradition in capital letters. And the traditional society doesn't even consider the possibility that there is an untruth. There is a book, right? There's the Quran, there's the Bible, there is the Torah, there is I think it's the Vedas from Hinduism, right? Whatever it is, usually in a book, right? And that's it. And it's just, that is the truth. And there's no possibility of it not being the truth. And if you meet, God forbid you meet someone else's truth, then that is definitely wrong, right? Because my truth is right, because it's a circular argument. And so this can be considered the argument from authority. And so truth and legitimacy and reality flows from authority figures, like typically a priest or a king or a queen or individuals like this. And then what happened with the movement of modernism, and this was particularly interesting around the discovery of the camera, because what the camera did to the world of art, and as a cascading consequence than everything else, because life imitates art often, is that people have been painting as accurately as possible for a very long time, especially in the medieval period and Renaissance period. So a lot of paintings were about, if I was doing a painting of you, it's how accurately can I paint Hannah again? And there's obviously a tremendous amount of skill in that. But now you have a device that's fairly affordable. I can take a picture of you and it'll be more accurate than maybe the best painter could paint, right? Or it's certainly at an equivalent level there. So you've radically changed what value lies. And so what this birthed in art is things like surrealism, things like Gaudi, for example, creating organic structures in architecture. You have people like Mondrian, you have people like Picasso, very famously, and God, what's the guy who drew the sunflowers, cut his ear off? I want to say Jules Verne, but it's not Jules Verne. Van Gogh, there we go. So they're bringing a very different style of art into play. And what this actually represents symbolically is a reconceptualization of truth itself. That, yes, you can take a photo, but that doesn't mean you can reveal what is really there. That by painting in different ways, in abstract ways, in surreal ways, you touch into different emotions, things that the camera cannot reveal. And this kind of is really the birth of modernism. And what that does is it challenges traditional ways of thinking. And so in modernism, what you've done is you've broken away from tradition and said there's different ways of seeing things. Now, modernism is an ism. And so a good way to understand modernism is when there's an ism. Feminism, communism, right? Nationalism, and many other isms, right? Vegetarianism, right? There's so many. And so what this meant for people is that truth could now come from different sources. And this really created a professional realm. And now what's happening in Industry 4.0 with the concept of mass individualization, I'll sorry, quick point there, that sort of second layer of truth, was reinforced by things like mass media. So we all watch the same sitcom, like Friends, on the same TV at the same time. We all listen to the same radio show. We all hear the same speech. So we're all unified around one source, and there's one controller. Now, and so that creates different identities. You could, for example, be a feminist, and you can be a mum, and you can be a doctor, right? And these different professions all come together, which is, in a traditional environment, you could not be this, right? You could not be this. And so you have a plurality of identity. And now what's happening in Industry 4.0 with mass individualism is that truth, again, changes to whatever you want it to be. You could Google search right now, right? And if anyone is listening, I encourage you to do this. Search the positive benefits of coffee, and then immediately search for the negative benefits or negative effects of coffee. And you'll see competing articles. Anything you can find anything you want to find in an internet search, right? And you can justify any theory that you want, right? From flat Earth to, are we in a simulation and anything in between? And so what's happening now is that the traditional controls around truth in terms of the flow of information and things like this are open, and anyone can believe anything that they want to believe, and they can live in their own echo chamber around that. And so that's really important to understand, because what that means is today is you can believe anything you want to believe. And that is both very powerful because we can build our own worlds, but it's also very dangerous because if you have a colossal amount of bullshit, you're going to have a really, really bad time. And it's very hard to step out of that. And what we're seeing, and sort of this bigger narrative, one of the things that stands out to me in this model of autocracy versus democracy for the last, building for the last decade, and I was certainly feeling that too, there's this idea that democracy was failing, right? It's just incompetent. We got riots everywhere. It's just a mess. And I think that's also one of the reasons why Putin struck to drive the UK. And I think he genuinely believed that the West was dead and it was over. The autocracies look strong because they were building their nation, strong leadership in place, right? Look at China, for example, look at Russia doing fantastic stuff. But what they were doing also is controlling the narrative. Now, of course, in the West, the narrative is controlled, right? But I think it's different in the way that narrative is controlled. Right? There's a much more plurality of worldviews and things can move much more quickly. In China and Russia, you cannot challenge truth that comes from the government. You cannot challenge in China Xi Jinping's COVID strategy, for example. It's just not tolerated. It's not going to happen. Whereas in America and the UK, you're entitled to your opinion, right? And things can change. And so what happens is that the way that autocracies work with this truth is that at first they think it's great because they can just create whatever story they want to create, right? And people will believe it, right? I do believe the Russian people genuinely think there are Nazis in the Ukraine and that Russia is on a holy war, essentially, to liberate their brothers and sisters from the clutches of Nazism. I think they really believe it. Problem is, it's just, well, certainly from another Western perspective, just completely not true. And so what happens there is that you're blinded by your own bullshit. And this is a bit like trying to drive a car, but instead of looking at what the road is doing, you're listening to someone tell you, oh yeah, the road is clear, it's fine, you're a great driver, it's amazing. Actually, maybe the road is full of traffic and you're a terrible driver, but no one wants to tell you. Because there's no flow of truth, what then happens in the autocracy, I think, is that it becomes unable to navigate. It doesn't even know what is real anymore. It can't separate fact from fiction. It doesn't know what is real. And this is then extremely dangerous because you can no longer navigate in the avocat environment. And this is the situation that Russia is now in, I believe. There is no way that Russia is going to win this war. And I think there's a growing outcome that Russia will be disintegrated by this war. I think there's a strong chance that by 2030, there will be no more Russia. And that certainly was something that was not predicted, I think, by anyone. Now, whether I'm right or wrong, that is time will tell. But the point is that even if they wanted to try and fix it now, they can't, because they don't have a culture of truth telling. They don't know what the military situation is on the ground. And I think what this kind of loops us back into is especially in the corporate environment, where these large corporations, many of them strike me as being this sort of Russia, right? They look really strong and powerful in the way that Russia parades its tanks out there, and these corporations have these great balance sheets and look that they're making great money, but they're actually very fragile. And when they encounter disruption, they just cannot handle it at all. And not only can they not handle it, but they don't have the truth systems in place because the political environment inside these organizations prevents people from sharing what's really going on. And this is a classic example of what happened in Nokia. Nokia was not able to understand the threat until it was far too late, and that's why they died. And so I think there's this, in this like narrative of talking about truth, I think I would summarize it by saying the truth is essential. Truth is a component of reality. You build reality with truth. And in today's age, you can pick any truths you want to build your reality. We essentially have a Lego mix. So go and play and have fun and build the realities you want, but be aware that you can delude yourself. And if you're not tolerating truths that challenge you and different to you, you're increasing risk of just believing your own bullshit until it becomes too late and you'll pay the price later on. And so I think an important part of being a leadapreneur is to have the maturity to understand that truth is a circle. And by that, I mean, you should be able to hold what I call the truth of two. You should hold your perspective and also be able to understand a counter perspective and understand that they're both descriptions of the same situation. So for example, when I think about Russia, talk about it with a friend, and they have a different worldview, it's not me trying to be right and them trying to be wrong. It's about us synthesizing perspectives to create a better understanding of what's going on. And with that approach, I think we have a much better chance of tackling avocat and being successful.
Well, that was some deep sharing, Jan. And from what I take from it is basically to be open to more truth, right? Is that what you would say that someone like me should do? I should just be open to more truth. There are other truths out there, right? Is that what you would say in the end as a summary?
Yes. And this is actually what I published one of my papers on, and it's got, I think, nearly 20 references now, is that it's not just, so yes, when we say be open to the truth, but it's important to make it a behavior that you practice, so that specific activities to be proactively explore the unknown. So it's not about just waiting for truth to arrive at you, because if you wait for things to arrive and hit you, it's too late. You don't have the responsiveness. You have to be proactively challenging yourself, finding people who think differently to you, invite them for dialogue, listen to what they have to say. And one of my favorite things, like, to myself, is just shut up, right? Force yourself to listen and manage your triggering, right? Build that discipline in your consciousness and challenge yourself, and therefore learn something that can enable you to grow and be more effective, rather than this childlike desire for being right or wrong. I think that when I hear that today, it's a bit like, it reminds me now of when I was a boy, and when children ask, Mommy, is Santa real or not? Right? And it's just sort of this naive question, as if there's a simple answer. Yes, Santa's real, or no, Santa's not real, right? Now, of course, you could say on the one hand, is there a man in a red suit who's flying around on the 24th of December delivering, billions of toys to children? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But if you were an alien arriving in Europe and America in Christmas, you would certainly be thinking that, Santa Claus was a real individual, because there's so much realism about that person, right? The symbology, the conversations, everything around it seems pretty real, right? And I think that's a more useful way of saying it. It's about moving ourselves away from the need to be right or wrong. It's instead about having a better understanding so we can be more effective.
Okay, and so now on towards the end of this podcast, I want to ask you a fun question, really. So when you're talking about truth and then how social media is flooded with truth, and that just reminds me of one thing that we're all seeing currently, which is the trial of Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. So, from what I see, there are sort of two truths here. One, which is the truth that the audience is hungry for drama, like even though you don't want to be part of it, but you sort of get trapped into it. And then there's the other part of the truth, which is marriage is a reality, and what goes on in the marriage is really between these two people, and then they each will have their own truth holding as to what will happen in the marriage. So what do you have to say on that?
Well, yes. I mean, I think it's there's so many good points that you made there already. What can I add to it? Especially about that idea that no marriage is perfect and everyone has their challenges within it, right? So I think what seems to have happened, though, is that, as I understand it, Amber Heard was publishing more and more articles making these claims against Johnny Depp. So she's pushing her truth and her story. So she's essentially creating a truth reality, right? She's putting information out into the world in a way that advances her cause and certainly seems to have harmed Johnny Depp, right? And so the thing to understand there is, if you're going to keep advancing your truth and it's at the detriment of others, at one point, they're going to hit you back. It's going to happen. And I think that's sort of what strikes me as the naivety of Amber Heard's situation there. And I think that also kind of in a way, people become very powerful truth wizards. They understand that truth is something that you work with. Truth is not an objective reality. There is no objective reality. There's no system of science that believes in an objective reality. Quantum mechanics and relativity are both subjective. So you can't claim to know the truth. But what people do is they claim to be owners of the truth. And so they will use that authority to push down other truths and elevate their own into what is real and correct. And I think that from what I can understand from a distance is that that was the last straw, probably not just for Johnny, but I can also imagine many of the people who were in his world would have been saying to him, hey, this is not true. This is not fair. You've gone too far. Is he a perfect man? Almost certainly not. I have yet to meet a perfect man or a woman. But when someone keeps trying to advance a cause over and over again at the detriment of someone else, I think that you need to understand that they will hit back. And then when they hit back and it goes to the legal system, what a lot of people don't understand about the legal system is they don't care about your truth. The legal system follows its procedures, and people confuse their emotions, their emotional truth, which is legitimate, with the legal truth of structure. And that's, I think, where we are seeing a collision there, because that emotional truth, which can be often very powerful in the near space, right? If you're with someone who has an emotionally powerful truth, right, and you're in their presence, literally, you can get caught up with their reality. But when you then go to a legal space, that doesn't work anymore. And so I think it's important there just to be conscious of the truths you want to share, and to kind of draw in a different direction. I think people have been facing this challenge for all of human existence, and the Buddha has, I call it the Buddhist checklist, right? And so the 3 points really, if you're going to say share truths, is it true? Right? Do you believe it's true? It doesn't matter what is it true, but do you believe it? Do I believe it's true? Is Jan, right? So do I believe it's true? Do I believe it's necessary to say this right now? Right? Sometimes it's just better not to say it, right? And sometimes, and third point is it kind? Is it kind? With what intention am I sharing this truth? Am I sharing it to be smarter than someone, to prove I'm better than them? Or because, I just want to try and make a quick joke at someone's expense, but actually maybe ends up hurting them, right? And so it's not about saying don't say unkind things. I don't believe it's I don't think that's the point. Sometimes you've got to be sharp, and if something needs to be said, then it needs to be said. But it's more about, helps me raise my state of consciousness so that I'm not so auto-reactive, that I am instead more Yan, rather than someone who's just being triggered by the social media cycles and whatever else we want to call it, right? So that's something that's really helped me. And I think we can, and what I draw away from that is that as long as I'm acting as best as I can in a way where I think it's true, necessary, and kind, I think life turns out to be fantastic. I think it's because we don't practice those principles, and we try and get away with sneaky little things, and then we get away with the one or two little white lies or black lies, and we keep getting away with it. So we get caught up in the power trip, and we lose our ethical and moral boundaries. We aren't able to say it's enough. This is too much. I need to return back to truth and just share what's actually really going on. We double down on our deceit, and that in the end is never going to work out well for us.
Well said there, Jan. So, talking about ethics and more, that's a whole another podcast. But so what I'll take from this is we need to ask ourselves, is this true? Is it necessary? And
is it kind?
Is it kind? Yeah. All right. So thank you so much for your time, Jan. And but you know what was interesting when we were talking about owners of truth and truth wizard, I was thinking we should create a game where we have this sort of, owners of truth, and then they like come up with their agenda and they have to push their agenda or their truth. And I don't know. I was thinking of something, a game like that would be fun, right? Like a truth wizard and owners of truth. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's actually what I envisioned the Leadapreneur ecosystem becoming. And that's really why because it's around this idea going back to, in the Leadapreneur system, there is no one truth. And there is no one source of truth. Every Leadapreneur shares their own truth. It's like we all see the same mountain and we see different things. And that's why the respect system that we're building into Cosmos becomes important, because someone who has, let's say, 1,000 respect probably knows what they're talking about, right? And someone who has 100 respect or 10 respect, it doesn't mean that they're wrong or right. It's about giving them a weight and a gravitas within the contextual situation. And so I think that's something we want to celebrate. So maybe we need some truth wizards It's a pretty cool idea, actually, right? And kind of bring that to life, because I think in gamifying it, because one of the real challenges is speaking truth to power, right? If you have a very powerful individual and you have a truth which disrupts their story and maybe in Asian culture, for example, causes them to lose face, then it's very difficult to go about sharing the truth, and you're not really incentivized to do it. But if it's in a game-like environment where there's one truth wizard and there's another truth wizard, and we can create a narrative around challenging ourselves with truths, then it becomes more playful and less difficult to talk about the hard truths. Because I think ultimately that's what we see in human civilization. Particularly in Asia, there's often this idea of saving face, and that's important. I've learned to understand that much more than I did before. So I respect that much more now, and I recognize it's real. But I don't believe that it should be at the price of truth. And I don't think that anyone from any culture would say it's better to save face than to lose all the truth. True humans, male, female, or anything else in between, will stand in truth. They stand in truth, and it's just that simple. And they have the courage to stand in that and the faith to do that. And that's, I think, what we really need in leadapreneurs, is people who have that commitment to truth, because that's how we build a better world. You can't build a better world with delusion and lies.
All right, Jan. So on this note, on all of us standing with truth, we're going to end this podcast. Thank you for your time, and we shall see you next week. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Leadapreneurs YouTube channel to get your weekly updates.